So our third snippet from this week looks at how FDR's election in 1932 changes the context of constitutional history. So here's the FDR election map from 1932. He basically sweeps the country. This is in the middle of the Depression. Two immediate effects of this. The first is that FDR, who had come out for repeal of prohibition during the campaign, that this paves the way for the 21st Amendment, which repeals the 18th Amendment. So prohibition becomes the only amendment not to pass. And then the second key event is the gradual shifting of African American voters from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. Now, for the most part, due to Jim Crow laws, Black people cannot vote in the southern states. Until the 1960s and 1970s. But there is a wave of migration of African Americans from the South to the North, beginning in the 19-teens and 1920s, sometimes called the Great Migration. And initially, Black voters, as they come to the North, retain their Republican Party loyalty. And the first African American elected to Congress during the 20th century, Oscar DePriest, is elected from the South Side district in Chicago, which was actually the seat that Barack Obama, when the only election Obama ever lost was he ran for the House in 2000, and he ran for the House from this seat. This was an area of Chicago that had become majority African American by this point, and these Black voters go for they want an African American congressman, but they go for the Republican because they see themselves as Republicans. But Black voters, even in the North, are disproportionately poor. They're disproportionately adversely affected by the Depression. They see in Roosevelt's New Deal a promise for a better future, and so in 1932, Black voters start to shift towards the Democratic Party. And in 1934, DePriest loses his seat to a Democrat, and this district will be represented by African American Democrats from 1934 until the present. So this is the sort of two political / constitutional effects of Roosevelt's emergence, that prohibition is gone and that Black voters begin to move towards the Democratic Party. Roosevelt has, to put it charitably, a very contentious relationship with the Supreme Court. Roosevelt's approach to the Depression, which it's not in any way an unreasonable one, is, look, we're facing this incredible controversy. Unemployment is 25%. Real unemployment in terms of people who can't work a full 40-hour week is probably close to 50%. The government needs to have the flexibility to try things and see if they work. And again, you can understand this from Roosevelt's perspective. The problem is that from the perspective of this man, Charles Evans Hughes, who has succeeded Taft as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Hughes is actually a moderate conservative. But a lot of these early Roosevelt gambits in the New Deal, the court believes goes too far. And the clearest manifestation of this is a case called Schechter Poultry Company versus the United States, a Brooklyn effect on the Supreme Court. So this challenged a New Deal law called the National Recovery Administration, which, in a very, very quickie summary, basically set up a tripartite system: one representative of government, one representative of businesses, one representative of labor, that would set wage and price guidelines for industry. And there was a comparable agency called the AAA for agriculture. And Congress said that it had this authority under the Interstate Commerce Clause. That is, that because Congress could regulate trade between the states, it had authority to tell businesses, what wages they had to pay to their workers and what prices they could charge to consumers. So the Schechter Poultry Company, which was a local firm, they sold slaughtered chickens, challenges the law on an intriguing basis. They say that their activities solely come in New York State. And therefore, this law is unconstitutional because it does not appropriately distinguish between interstate commerce, which Congress can regulate, and intrastate commerce, that is, commerce just between within a single state, which Congress cannot regulate. And by a 9-0 ruling in quite sweeping language, the court says the Schechters are correct, that the Constitution does not provide in Schechter authority for the federal government to enact a centralized economic system. Now, as we'll see in the 40s, the court kind of moves away from this approach relatively quickly, but the NRA is struck down. Now, the irony here is the NRA didn't work very well, and even though Roosevelt, this is embarrassing for Roosevelt, it's a 9-0 defeat, he probably was better off with the NRA gone. The problem is that there seems to be a pretty firm majority on the court that is inclined to just strike down a wide variety of New Deal policy. So Roosevelt's getting this pressure from the right. At the same time, he's getting pressure from the left. The man on the left here is Huey Long, who was a Democratic senator from Louisiana, wanted to be president, was this kind of caudillo type of figure. He winds up being assassinated in 1935. The man on the right is William Townsend, who champions a liberal program of old age pensions. Huey Long's policy is called "Share the Wealth." He wants, the government to send out checks to the American public and to tax big business and the wealthy to finance these efforts. Roosevelt doesn't want to go as far as Long and Townsend, but he feels the political heat. And the result is two major pieces of legislation passed in 1935. One is called the Wagner Act, which it regulates how the power of labor unions, and gives labor unions far more freedom to form. And the second is the Social Security Act, which creates, as we all know, Social Security. This old age, it's a different model than what Townsend wanted, but nonetheless deals with some of Townsend's concerns. Now, these pieces of legislation, this is the Social Security Act vote, overwhelmingly pass in Congress. Both the House and the Senate vote in favor. You can see from the figures here, this is a Congress that is overwhelmingly around 3-1 Democratic. This third party, the Farmer Labor Party, was a left-wing party in the Midwest. So these are both very, very popular policies. The problem for Roosevelt, this is Robert Wagner, who sponsors the New York senator whose son then becomes mayor of New York City in the 1950s and 1960s. The problem for Roosevelt is that these measures start to get challenged in court. And again, this is still a conservative court. Roosevelt runs for re-election in 1936. He is overwhelmingly elected, the strongest performance in American history in a competitive election. Until that time, the Republicans carry only Maine and Vermont at this point, very Republican states, a reminder of how individual state loyalties do tend to shift over time. But the question, despite Roosevelt winning 46 of 48 states, is, will the Supreme Court strike down his New Deal? There are a whole bunch of key cases dealing with, including cases dealing with the Wagner Act, the Social Security Act, labor protections, including the minimum wage, which are on tap for the court to consider in 1937. Roosevelt has overwhelming majorities in both the House and the Senate. He actually gains seats. Democratic Party gained seats in the 1936 election. It's the only time this happens in the 20th century where the Democrats or the Republicans gain seats in congressional elections in both houses of Congress in 4 consecutive elections: 30, 32, 34, 36 for the Democrats. And so it's a very, very impressive performance. But Roosevelt's thinking is, look, I have 3/4 of Congress backing me, and yet all of my legislation might get struck down. There are 4 ultra-conservatives on the court, including one Democratic nominee, Justice McReynolds, who was nominated by Wilson. There are three kind of liberals on the court, and then there's Chief Justice Hughes and a justice named Owen Roberts, who tend to sympathize with the conservatives, but at least in theory might be winnable. But in effect, Roosevelt is facing a 6-3 minority on the court. So Roosevelt in 1937, quite early after having been reelected, decides that the way to get around having a 6-3 minority on the court is to propose packing the court, adding 6 members to the court, which would have given him a 9-6 majority. He can't come out and say he wants to add justices to the court so they'll vote his way. And so instead he says that he's deeply concerned with the workload of these justices. He says they're elderly men. It's tough to think and to draw up opinions. And so the proposal that the legislation that he offers says that the president will have the power to add an additional justice for every justice over the age of 60, which would have again had the effect of adding 6 justices and would have ensured that there would be a liberal majority of the court. And initially, this is quite popular. This is a cartoon picturing the court as a horse and buggy operation. Roosevelt had denounced the court for its horse and buggy economics, with all of these good pieces of legislation being clogged behind this Supreme Court that has sort of lost its way. But gradually, opposition to the court packing scheme emerges, not just from conservatives, although the conservatives are the key figures in opposing it, but from some progressives as well. The most prominent of them is this man, Burton Wheeler, who was a Democratic senator from Montana who had been Robert La Follette's running mate in 1924 on that third-party progressive ticket. And Wheeler is concerned that Roosevelt is behaving kind of like a fascist dictator here, sort of seizing power. He's worried about the international ramifications. And the result is this court packing fight in the Senate in which Roosevelt's political strength is badly eroded. This is a cartoon from a few weeks after Wheeler comes out against the court packing plan, which sort of creates, a cover for conservatives to really criticize it. So we see a 15-person Supreme Court, the 9 justices who are currently on the court, and then 6 puppets of FDR who are whispering in the other justices' ear in terms of what they want to do. At the end of the day, the court packing plan never gets voted on in the Senate. It's clear that it does not have majority support. And the result of the political battle over this is the creation of what's called the Conservative Coalition, an alliance of conservative Southern Democrats with a more conservative Republican Party that will frustrate liberal legislation for a generation. That said, as we'll see, the pressure from court packing may very well have had an effect on how the Supreme Court handled these cases from 1937 onward, and we'll look at that in our final snippet for this week.